You're probably thinking to yourself, what sort of voodoo is this? Well, there is no voodoo here. As hard as it is to believe, the people in these photos aren't actually headless. It's simply a manipulation of photography. In the 19th century, while other photographers took normal photos and made good money with them, some Victorian photographers discovered something fascinating that they could do with their photography that could make them a few extra bucks. So by combining images from multiple negatives, these Victorian photographers were able to manipulate photos whichever way their clients requested. Now, one would think making them look slimmer or have clearer skin would be the people's choice back then. But for some reason, most of the people requested that their photos were manipulated to look like they were headless, or place their heads on their lap or hands. Others even fancied photos that made them look like they were floating in the air. These types of photos were a fan favorite, and people would usually pay good money for this. Definitely a higher sum than for a normal photograph. Sure, in this day and age, an 8-year-old could manipulate photos from his bedroom through Photoshop and produce even more bizarre images than this. But back in the 19th century, this was a novel phenomenon. Trick photography, it was called. But when it comes to bizarre situations, this next photo is a bit more unsettling. Once upon a time, up to 30 to 60 million bison existed on the face of the earth. But as at the time this photo was taken in 1892, there were only about 456 in existence. So what happened? Well, in the 18th century, bisons were hunted so much for their hide and bones. As the market demand increased, so did the hunters and suppliers. Between 1850 and 1870, most bison herds were brutally hunted down and exterminated. This photograph represents how much of an endangered species bison was at the time and the demand for their preservation. Despite the fact that the animals were being killed at an alarming rate in North America, there was little to be done to stop it. However, another thought that's hard to imagine is what happened in the life of this young girl. This young girl's name was Olive Oatman, and the story of her life is harrowing enough to make you shed a tear or two. Born in 1837 in Illinois, Olive was part of a Mormon family that embarked on a westward journey to find a new home in California. But this journey took a tragic turn in 1851 when the family was attacked by a group of Native Americans believed to be Yavapai in what is now Arizona. Most of her family were killed, and Olive, then 14 years old, along with her younger sister Mary Ann, were taken captive. Now the story takes yet another dramatic turn. After enduring a difficult period with the Yavapai, Olive and her little sister, Mary Ann, were traded to the Mojave people. And unlike the Yavapai, the Mojave treated the girls relatively well, adopting them into their community. If you're wondering what that is, on her chin, it is a distinctive blue tattoo, a traditional mark of the Mojave, symbolizing her acceptance and integration into the tribe. Despite this acceptance, the ordeal was far from easy. Soon enough, Mary Ann tragically died as a result of starvation, leaving Olive as the sole survivor of her entire family. But her story doesn't end here. It takes yet another turn in 1856 when she was ransomed and returned to white society. Her return was widely publicized, making her a subject of fascination and intrigue. She later recounted her experiences in a memoir, The Captivity of the Oatman Girls, which contributed to her lasting legacy. But despite all, could Olive Oatman have healed from her terrible ordeal? Now, healing is all good and fine, but this next one takes it to a whole other level. In this photo, it looks like a masquerade has captured a little boy and is about to torture him. But in reality, that is far from the truth. This particular photo was captured in the 1890s by Frank G. Carpenter. And far from the looks of things, this masquerade-looking thing was actually a medicine man known to also be an exorcist and healer. In this photo, the Eskimo medicine man, as he was called, was apparently exorcising an evil spirit from a little boy in Alaska. The fascinating part about this is that this particular healer was not the only one. There were several medicine men and women in the indigenous parts of America who were revered and respected as healers and even spiritual leaders in the community. If you think this is a little creepy, wait till you see this. This photo was taken in 1887, and it is of the Apache spirit dancers, otherwise known as Gan, or mountain spirits. They were a representation of powerful and supernatural beings. Each of their costumes were of different beings to be revered and feared, and they were known for their dances. Now these dance moves were not for entertainment and for the crowd to cheer, but they told a story instead. Those funny-looking headdresses on their heads was a form of storytelling and healing from the mountain spirits. Their attire is not merely decorative, but is imbued with spiritual significance, designed to invoke the presence and power of the Gan. Each element of their costume and each movement they perform is a sacred act meant to connect the physical world with the spiritual realm. Now back to their dances. They carried power in their moves, and the stories they told were of Gan and its power. It was called the spirit dance. The spirit dance itself is a mesmerizing spectacle, featuring rhythmic drumming, chanting, and intricate dance movements. These dances often take place at night, illuminated by the glow of a central fire, enhancing the otherworldly atmosphere. The dancers move with a deliberate grace, their motions telling stories of creation, protection, and the ongoing struggle between good and evil. As they dance, the spirit dancers are believed to call upon the Gan to bring blessings, health, and prosperity to the community. One of the most significant occasions for the spirit dancers is the sunrise ceremony, an important rite of passage for young Apache girls entering womanhood. This 4-day ceremony involves rigorous physical and spiritual preparation, with the spirit dancers playing a crucial role in invoking the protection and guidance of the Gan for the young initiate. Through their dance, they convey the strength, resilience, and continuity of Apache traditions, ensuring that these values are passed on to the next generation. In addition to their role in ceremonies, the spirit dancers are also called upon to aid in healing the sick. Through their powerful connection to the spiritual world, they perform dances and rituals intended to drive away illness and negative energies, restoring balance and harmony to those in need. The presence of the spirit dancers at these times serves as a potent reminder of the interconnectedness of all life and the enduring power of the Apache spiritual beliefs. To those who do not understand the Apache tradition, these dancers could be scary and eerie, but none of this is as eerie as this next story. Understandably, there are so many questions triggered in this photo. For instance, is she wearing a mask? Who is that lurking figure behind her? What is going on in the photo? And more disturbingly, where are her legs? If you have any of these questions, know that they are good ones. Sadly, however, the answers are elusive. For some reason, this picture has been studied for decades, and there is still little to no information about it. No one knows for sure who took the photo and what date. No one has any idea what was going on in the photo or could respond to why the photo even exists in the first place. As eerie as it is, the lack of information here makes this all even more scary. If only those Victorian photographers were behind it. But when it comes to stories that are hard to understand, the next photo takes the cake. The little boy you see in this photo is Jimmy McKinn Santiago, and those people behind him are actually his captors. Here's what happened. Little McKinn once lived with his family in the lower Mimbres Valley in New Mexico. But when he was around 11 or 12, he was kidnapped by a group of Chiricahua Apache led by Geronimo. When the abductors approached them from nowhere, McKinn was with his brother Martin, and sadly, the Apache killed his brother and then took the grief-stricken McKinn away. Now, no doubt, all of these are a lot for a young boy to go through, but here's where the story takes an unpredictable turn. After a while, McKinn was actually rescued by a man called General George Crook, but for some reason, he chose not to go with him. McKinn preferred to stay with his captors, the Apache who killed his brother, and so he stayed. For 6 whole months, he lived with the Apache, became one of them, learnt their ways, their language, and their lifestyle. Probably a serious case of Stockholm Syndrome. But while taking a photo with your captors is weird, nothing beats the type of photo you're about to see next. What do you see in this photo? Your best guess would probably be a well-dressed gentleman who appears to be asleep, slumped on a chair. But your best guess would be wrong. The man in the photo is in fact dead. This was in the 1800s, and it was in the era of post-mortem photography, or quite simply, taking photos of dead people. I bet you're asking yourself why anyone would think to do this. Well, we have already established that the Victorian photographers had an eye for the bizarre. But in reality, these photographers simply had an eye for business and meeting the supply of whatever was demanded at the time. Around the early 1800s, the only way you could have a photo of a loved one who passed away was to have a portrait of them made, but this was very expensive, and not a lot of people could afford it. Enter Victorian photographers who offered to create a portrait of a deceased. It was still expensive, but not as much as painted portraits, and so post-mortem photography became a thing. Usually only afforded by the wealthier class, businesses were built solely on their ability to portray a deceased person in the perfect light, almost as though they were still alive. So these portraits would usually look as though the deceased was doing something mundane like eating, sitting, standing, etc. The aim was to have a photo for their loved ones to remember them by, and a photo that reminded them of when the deceased was still alive. So these Victorian photography businesses competed on who could create the most alive photo of a deceased person. And from the looks of things, they appeared to do a very good job of that. But apparently, it wasn't only loved ones who wanted to photograph the dead. This photo is that of a deceased outlaw named William Brazelton. He was so notorious and legendary, he wrote his name on the sands of time in American history. In this photo, he is dead and covered with a mask, the same way he would mask his face to commit crimes. His eventual death was cause for celebration. When an outlaw is nicknamed Brazen Bill, you can only imagine how bold and audacious his crimes were. He is believed to have been born around 1849, and like many outlaws of the time, his background remains shrouded in mystery. It is thought that he may have drifted into a life of crime due to the turbulent and lawless conditions of the American frontier during his formative years. Brazen Bill became notorious primarily from his stagecoach robberies in the Arizona Territory. Back then, stagecoaches were a common target for outlaws in the Old West, as they often carried valuable goods, money, and passengers who could be held for ransom. Brazen Bill was known for his meticulous planning and execution of these robberies, often disguising himself and employing cunning tactics to evade capture. One of his most infamous exploits occurred in the summer of 1878, when he robbed a stagecoach near Tucson, Arizona. Dressed in a long duster coat and wearing a mask, Brazelton boldly held up the coach, demanding money and valuables from its passengers. But soon enough, his exploits were about to come to an end. In August 1878, local law enforcement, determined to put an end to his crimes, set a trap for him. Pima County Sheriff Charles A. Chabelle and his deputies devised a plan to capture Brazelton by using a decoy stagecoach filled with armed guards. The trap was sprung successfully, and during the ensuing gunfight, Brazelton was fatally wounded. He succumbed to his injuries shortly after, bringing an end to his brief but notorious career as an outlaw. Now from the world of crime, let's venture into the world of entertainment with this inspiring photo. This man is a legend in American history. He came from nothing and took over the world of entertainment. He was born on February 26, 1846 in the Iowa Territory, and he became one of the most iconic figures of the American Old West. His life was an extraordinary blend of adventure, showmanship, and significant contributions to the mythology of the American frontier. Buffalo Bill's real name was William Cody, and his early years were spent in the rugged terrain of Kansas, where he experienced firsthand the challenges and dangers of frontier life. His father died when he was just 11 years old, thrusting young William into a world of responsibility and survival. To support his family, he took on various jobs, including cattle herding, gold prospecting, and working as a messenger for a freight company. These formative experiences laid the groundwork for his later exploits. At the age of 14, Cody's bravery and horsemanship earned him a position as a rider for the Pony Express, the legendary mail service that relied on fast horses and daring riders to deliver mail across vast distances. This role required not only physical endurance, but also a fearless spirit, qualities that Cody embodied. When the Civil War broke out, Cody served as a scout for the Union Army, using his knowledge of the terrain and his tracking skills to aid the war effort. After the war, he continued to work as a scout, this time for the U.S. Army during the Indian Wars. It was during this period that Cody earned the nickname Buffalo Bill for his prowess in hunting buffalo to supply meat for the railroad workers. Buffalo Bill's fame began to spread, and in 1869, he was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his service as a scout. However, it was his transition from a frontier scout to a showman that cemented his place in history. In 1883, Cody founded Buffalo Bill's Wild West, a traveling show that brought the drama and excitement of the Wild West to audiences across the United States and Europe. The show featured reenactments of famous battles, displays of horsemanship and sharpshooting exhibitions, often starring real-life Western legends like Annie Oakley and Sitting Bull. Through his Wild West show, Buffalo Bill became an international celebrity, shaping the world's perception of the American frontier. He masterfully blended fact and fiction, creating a captivating narrative that celebrated the spirit of adventure and rugged individualism. His show not only entertained, but also preserved the stories and legends of the Old West, ensuring that they would endure for generations to come. Buffalo Bill's influence extended beyond entertainment. He was an advocate for the rights of Native Americans and worked to promote understanding and reconciliation between indigenous peoples and settlers. Despite the showmanship and spectacle, Cody maintained a deep respect for the cultures and histories he portrayed. William Frederick Cody, Buffalo Bill, died on January 10, 1917, leaving behind a legacy that continues to capture the imagination. You know when one small thing becomes such a big deal for no reason? Well, this next photo represents exactly that. These three men lying lifeless in their coffins tell a story of the aftermath of one of the most brutal gunfights in American history. As far as American frontier history is concerned, few events are as infamous as the gunfight at the OK Corral, which took place on October 26, 1881, in Tombstone, Arizona Territory. This legendary shootout, lasting only about 30 seconds, left 3 men dead and became a symbol of the Wild West's lawlessness and violence. Among those who perished were Tom McClory, Frank McClory, and Billy Clanton. This haunting portrait captured the aftermath, depicting the 3 fallen outlaws laid out for public view. But what caused such a brutal gunfight? Well, on October 26, 1881, in Tombstone, Arizona Territory, a simmering feud between lawmen and outlaws, fueled by personal animosities, political rivalries, and economic conflicts ensued. This legendary confrontation was not an isolated event, but the result of escalating tensions that had been building for months. At the heart of the conflict were 2 opposing factions: the Earp brothers, along with their ally Doc Holliday, and a group of cowboys led by the Clanton and McClory families. The Earps, Virgil, Wyatt, and Morgan, had come to Tombstone seeking fortune and stability. Virgil Earp served as the town marshal, while Wyatt held the position of deputy U.S. Marshal. They were determined to bring law and order to a town rife with criminal activity. Standing in their way were the Clanton and McClory families, known for their involvement in cattle rustling, stagecoach robberies, and other illicit activities. Ike and Billy Clanton, along with Tom and Frank McClory, represented the cowboy faction that saw the Earps as a threat to their way of life and their means of making a living. The animosity between these groups was exacerbated by a series of confrontations and accusations. The Earps and Holliday believed that the cowboys were responsible for a number of crimes in the area, including the robbery of a Wells Fargo stagecoach in which 2 men were killed. Tensions reached a boiling point when Wyatt Earp, seeking the sheriff's position, made political enemies among those who supported the cowboy faction. On the morning of October 26, 1881, Ike Clanton, drunk and belligerent, had a heated argument with Doc Holliday and threatened the Earps. Virgil Earp, as town marshal, decided it was time to disarm the cowboys who were openly carrying weapons in violation of a city ordinance. Virgil, along with Wyatt, Morgan, and Holliday, set out to confront the cowboys and demand that they surrender their weapons. The confrontation occurred near the OK Corral in a vacant lot behind the photography studio of C.S. Fly. The cowboys, Tom and Frank McClory, Billy Clanton, and a few others, refused to comply. What followed was a brief but deadly exchange of gunfire that lasted only about 30 seconds. When the smoke cleared, Tom and Frank McLaury and Billy Clanton lay dead, while Virgil and Morgan Earp, as well as Doc Holliday, were wounded. The aftermath of the gunfight was as contentious as the events leading up to it. The Earp brothers and Holliday were initially arrested for murder but were later exonerated after a lengthy hearing. The gunfight and its consequences further polarized the town, leading to a cycle of revenge that saw the subsequent assassination of Morgan Earp. It's sad to know that those 3 men lost their lives, but this next man would lose his license if he did this today. This looks like torture, doesn't it? Or perhaps a rather fascinating piece of BDSM rooted deep in American history? Well, none of these are even remotely close to what's actually going on in this photo. As a matter of fact, what you see here is actually a very meticulous medical treatment by a very renowned surgeon named Louis Sayre. Between 1820 and 1900, Louis A. Sayre reigned as a reputable surgeon and a significant figure in the history of orthopedics in America. He was a charter member of several medical societies, including the American Medical Association, and served as its president in 1880. What you see in this photo is one of the methods he used in his private practice to stretch the spine and relieve stress. It involved his patients suspended in the air and hanging by their arms. A plaster of Paris jacket was fitted in order to hold the spine in place after suspension. The treatment was known to treat scoliosis and Pott's disease, also known as spinal tuberculosis. Sure, his methods were bizarre. In today's world, he'd have probably been stripped of his license, but hey, kudos to him for creativity. In the end, all of these photographs tell rich and disturbing stories that make up American history. If you've enjoyed this so far, tell us in the comments which of these stories resonates with you the most. Also, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more fascinating, creepy, and disturbing photos that contribute to the rich and boisterous American history.